All right, so you want to talk Vaush. You've brought some forum posts from Kiwi Farms, of all places. And, well, let's just say this is going to be interesting.
Yeah, Kiwi Farms is something else.
Yeah, definitely a corner of the internet.
That's one way to put it.
Okay, so before we get into the nitty-gritty, let's set the stage a little bit. We're talking online leftism. We're talking about those, like, fiery corners of the internet where political commentary can get intense. And at the center of this one is a name that tends to spark either passionate support or absolute outrage. We're talking about Vaush. So our mission today is to try to figure out why.
And we're doing it all through the lens of Kiwi Farms, which I'll say right now, not exactly known for their balanced reporting.
Putting it lightly.
Yeah, I think less, reputable news source, and more like that friend of yours who loves to gossip. Maybe takes things a little too far sometimes.
Yeah, a little bit. Definitely need to take things with a grain of salt. But even their harshest critics can't say they don't dig up some interesting stuff, like in this case. The forum seems absolutely convinced that Vaush is advocating for some truly shocking things. They even go so far as to accuse him of supporting pedophilia.
Yeah, and that's a serious accusation. And it's one that they repeat a lot throughout these posts. But I'll say right now it's important to remember that they very often present this without the full context of Vaush's actual arguments.
And that's what makes this whole thing so tricky. We're dealing with accusations, interpretations, a whole lot of online noise. So let's try to filter through some of that for a second. According to the forum, Who is Vaush? Paint us a picture.
So based purely on these posts, Vaush is a self-proclaimed leftist political commentator. He's built a pretty massive online presence, Twitch streams, YouTube videos, the whole 9 yards. He really seems to thrive on debate. He's become a prominent voice in what they call BreadTube.
BreadTube. Okay, for those of us who haven't ventured down that particular internet rabbit hole, what exactly are we talking about here?
Imagine like a corner of YouTube where socialist theory reigns supreme. And that's basically the gist. It's this loose collection of creators who use the platform to discuss, to debate, leftist politics, often with a pretty heavy dose of irony and humor, I'd say.
Okay, so not exactly your grandma's news channel. So how does Vaush fit into this world?
Well, he's part of a subgroup within BreadTube that the forum refers to as the dirtbag left.
Dirtbag left. Okay, that label is very telling.
It is. It is.
Tell me more.
Well, dirtbag left seems to be synonymous with a much more abrasive and confrontational style of online discourse. Think less reasoned arguments and more like shock tactics, really kind of pushing the boundaries of what's considered acceptable.
And that's where some of these accusations of hypocrisy seem to come into play, right?
Exactly. The forum really paints Vaush as this champion of left unity. But at the same time, he's constantly engaging in these online feuds, often with other leftists. And it's this kind of perceived contradiction that seems to fuel a lot of the animosity towards him.
So it sounds like there's more to it than just disagreeing on policy. It's personal, it's about online personas, maybe even a bit of a power struggle going on within this whole BreadTube ecosystem.
Oh, absolutely. And that's what makes this whole deep dive so fascinating. We're not just talking about one man's political views. We're looking at the underbelly of online political engagement in general, where drama and ideology and personal vendettas all kind of collide.
And sometimes those collisions get messy. Like you need to call HR levels of messy. Speaking of which, the forum dedicates an entire section to something called Poppy and his cock. And let me tell you, it is as wild as it sounds.
Oh yes, the infamous Poppy incident. This one seems to follow Vaush around to this day.
It all stems from accusations of sexual harassment, alleged chat logs, some truly bizarre comments about, well, let's just say male anatomy. And this incident seems to have led to Vaush being ostracized from certain online communities. But the forum claims that he never really owned up to his actions, calling it a non-apology and accusing him of lacking remorse.
And it's important to note here that the forum is presenting a very specific narrative about this whole thing. They're highlighting the most inflammatory details and using it as evidence of Vaush's supposed hypocrisy and toxic behavior.
Which seems to be their MO, right? To present a version of Vaush that fits their narrative. But even beyond Poppy and his cock, there are all these other incidents the forum uses to kind of bolster their case. Like this whole thing about him making, and I can't believe I'm saying this out loud, horse cock comments.
Yeah, more bizarre internet slang. Honestly, kind of hard to even address seriously.
Yeah.
But it does point to this pattern of Vaush using very provocative language, which seems to be a recurring theme with him.
Right. And it's this whole persona, this dirtbag left attitude that the forum seems to latch onto. They paint him as this walking contradiction, a champion of the left who thrives on division, a vocal advocate for social justice who allegedly engages in really problematic behavior.
And it's this perceived dissonance that seems to be at the heart of the Kiwi Farms obsession. They see him as this puzzle to be solved, this villain to be exposed.
But the question is, are they presenting a fair and balanced picture? Or are they selectively curating information to fit a predetermined narrative?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it?
It is, and to answer it, we need to go beyond this surface-level drama. We need to delve into the actual arguments that Vaush is making. Because for all this talk about horsecocks and online feuds, the forum seems most concerned with his views on some very, very serious topics, like child pornography.
And that's where things get really interesting. Because to understand the forum's accusations, we have to understand Vaush's actual stance, which is a lot more nuanced than they'd have you believe. So let's unpack this child pornography accusation, because it's a heavy one, and honestly, the forum uses it as a cornerstone of their argument against Vaush.
Yeah, and just to be crystal clear for our listeners, we are not here to endorse or downplay any illegal activity. We're just here to try to understand the nuances of these accusations and why the forum latched onto them so strongly.
Exactly, and the forum repeatedly claims that Vaush supports decriminalizing child pornography, which, on the surface, that's a very inflammatory statement.
To say the least. But what's the context here? Like, what are Vaush's actual arguments as presented in these forum posts?
Well, that's where things get interesting. The forum highlights a hypothetical scenario that Vaush has used in the past. It's like a thought experiment of sorts.
Yeah.
About someone unknowingly possessing child pornography on a secondhand hard drive.
Okay, so the classic, I bought a used computer and it had illegal files on it scenario. Yeah, that's a complicated legal issue for sure.
Exactly, and the forum really dumps on this. They suggest that Vaush's stance is that simply possessing this content, even unknowingly, shouldn't be a criminal offense. But it's crucial to point out here, at no point do they provide any evidence of Vaush endorsing pedophilia itself. It's all about framing his position in the most extreme light possible.
It's giving straw man argument. Take someone's words, twist them just enough to make them seem outrageous, and then attack that twisted version.
Exactly. It's a classic online debate tactic.
Yeah.
And the forum employs it masterfully throughout these posts.
And it's not just child pornography, is it? They also go after his views on political violence.
They do. They paint him as this radical leftist who's advocating for violent revolution. You know, they quote him making these statements about the necessity of violence to achieve political change.
Which, again, taken at face value, sounds extreme. But I have a feeling there's more to this story.
There usually is. And remember how we talked about the forum's tendency to cherry-pick information? Well, this is a prime example. They conveniently leave out any nuance or context surrounding these statements about violence.
So what are they missing?
Well, for one, they seem to contradict themselves. On the one hand, they're painting him as this dangerous radical. But then they turn around and mock him for being too lazy to actually engage in any real-world action. It's like they're trying to have it both ways.
So which one is it? Is he an armchair revolutionary or is he a harmless keyboard warrior? It seems like they're more interested in crafting a narrative than actually, like, engaging with his arguments, honestly.
Precisely. And this pattern of selective quoting and out-of-context interpretation continues when they go into Vaush's past. They managed to unearth some ancient forum posts from his teenage years, back when he was apparently obsessed with bodybuilding.
Oh, there's always some cringy teenage internet posts. Give you the goods, what'd they find?
Get ready for this. Get big or get disappointed. Get swole or cry over it.
Wow. Just wow. It's like a time capsule of early 2000s internet slang.
Right. And it's not just the language that's outdated. They highlight what they see as hypocrisy in his past statements, particularly around his views on women and relationships. They contrast this younger, more self-improvement focused Vaush with this image they've constructed of him as lazy and entitled.
It's like they're trying to, like, perform an amateur psychoanalysis based on a handful of decontextualized forum posts from his adolescence. But how much can we really glean about someone's character from something they wrote as a teenager?
Exactly. People change, they evolve, they learn from their mistakes. The forum seems determined to ignore this possibility completely, choosing instead to present this static, unchanging image of Vaush, frozen in time as this monstrous caricature.
Which brings us back to the central question here. Is this an accurate representation of Vaush? Or are we looking at a carefully constructed hit piece that's been designed to discredit him?
To answer that, we need to take a step back and consider the source. Because, as we've seen, Kiwi Farms has a very specific way of framing information. It's a lens that often distorts as much as it reveals.
And that lens is something that we will be examining in detail as we continue this deep dive. All right, so time for a gut check here. We've been really deep in the weeds of Kiwi Farms, dissecting their arguments, analyzing their methods.
And it's important to remember, they're not exactly what you call a neutral party.
That's putting it lightly. We've talked about taking things with a grain of salt, but honestly, with Kiwi Farms, it's more like a whole salt lick.
Yeah, their whole brand of online discourse really thrives on drama and exaggeration, often outright cruelty. It's a very particular echo chamber, and it's easy to get swept up in their version of events.
Especially with someone like Vaush. He just seems to be a lightning rod for controversy. It's clear the forum has a very specific opinion of him, but how much of it is actually rooted in reality?
The million-dollar question, right? I mean, we've seen how they cherry-pick information,
Yeah.
how they take arguments out of context, how they use humor and hyperbole to basically paint him as this larger-than-life villain.
And it's tempting to just dismiss them entirely, write them off as just another toxic corner of the internet. But I'm wondering, is there anything we can actually take away from a deep dive like this? Any valuable insights beyond just the drama and the mudslinging?
I think there are a few key takeaways. First, this whole thing has really highlighted the power, but also the peril of these online platforms. Vaush built his entire career on places like Twitch and YouTube, and it's also where his critics have chosen to, tear him down.
Yeah, it's a double-edged sword. These platforms give a voice to the voiceless, but they also create these echo chambers that can amplify the most extreme viewpoints.
Exactly, and it's in these online spaces that reputations are built and destroyed, often with very little accountability.
Which brings us to takeaway number 2, the importance of critical thinking in the age of information overload. We are bombarded with content from all sides, and it's so easy to get swept up in the narratives that confirm our existing biases.
Oh, absolutely. It's more important than ever to question your sources, to consider multiple perspectives, to be wary of anyone who claims to have all the answers.
Easier said than done, though, right? Especially when you're talking about these complex issues and these larger-than-life personalities.
Oh, for sure. But that's why these kinds of deep dives are so valuable. They force us to engage with uncomfortable ideas, to challenge our own assumptions, to really think critically about the information that we're consuming.
So where does all this leave us with Vaush then? I mean, is he the monster that Kiwi Farms makes him out to be? Or is he just a flawed human being who's trying to navigate the, let's face it, often treacherous waters of online political commentary?
That is for each individual listener to decide. We've presented the information, we've analyzed the arguments, we've highlighted the biases at play. Now it's up to you to draw your own conclusions.
And to do that, you need to venture beyond the echo chamber. Don't let Kiwi Farms be your only source of information on Vaush. Seek out different perspectives, engage with his actual work, and form your own informed opinion.
And remember, this isn't just about Vaush. This is about how we engage with information online, how we navigate the complexities of online discourse, how we form our own opinions in a world that is absolutely saturated with narratives.
It is a lot to unpack, but hey, that's what deep dives are all about. Thanks for joining us on this one. Until next time, stay curious, stay critical, and don't believe everything you read on the internet, especially if it comes from Kiwi Farms.